You're listening to Surviving and Thriving with Renisha, a podcast about life, mental health, and personal growth. Here I talk about my journey living with borderline personality disorder, depression, and anxiety, and how I'm learning to love myself despite it. Let's get into it. Hello, and welcome back to my podcast. For those who are new, I am Renisha. I go by Just Riri Shop Online, and I live with borderline personality disorder, severe depression, anxiety, and other things as well. But I'm back again today with a new episode, and I will say that my last episode was about existential angst, and I'm still honestly not feeling good. And I think that my voice and the way that I talk and my intonation, all of those things change when I'm not feeling well. So if you're listening to this, I'm going to have a video for this one. So I'll post it on YouTube too. But if you're listening to this, my voice probably just sounds like really slow and like I'm dragging my words out. And it's because I've just been tired. Like I have been really exhausted and I've had a lot of problems sleeping lately. And I realized that I've been neglecting some of my routines that I know really help me stay stable. And so that's really what I want to talk about today. And I specifically want to focus on my spiritual practices and my spiritual routines. So I want to just caveat this by saying if you are opposed to or uncomfortable listening to anything that has anything to do with spiritual practices, whether you consider them new age. I don't. I think a lot of them are hijacked from ancient traditions. But anything that is not necessarily religious, and if you have your own faith, then I always encourage people to seek out information and content that aligns with and resonates with them. So if you identify within a particular religion and you're uncomfortable hearing things about other spiritual practices outside of that, then I just want to put that warning out there because I do practice like rituals and African voodoo, hoodoo, stuff that is often stigmatized, misunderstood, and misrepresented in the media and usually frowned upon by those who are in religious groups. So I want to put that out there because I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. And I want to give you a chance to click off and find something that resonates with you more. So I'll just pause and put that out there. But I made an episode previously. I can't remember how long ago it was. I do this every time. I'm like, I made an episode about something and I forgot, but whatever. I also have ADHD, so um I specifically went through like my routines, my daily routines that help my mental health, based on the grapes formula. And for those of you who have never heard of that and maybe you're not as familiar with like the clinical mental health practices and CBT and all of that stuff. Grapes is like an acronym. I always forget, like I legitimately always forget what the acronyms mean. So let me look it up really quick. Um, but essentially what it is a way for you to kind of keep track of the things that you do for your self-care when you're struggling with depression in particular. Because when you struggle with severe depression like I do, you lack energy, you lack motivation. It can be really hard to do like simple everyday things. I am burdened with the label of high functioning because I still accomplish quite a lot, but I am still severely depressed. And so it, even though I talked about this I think in my last episode too, like I kind of just had it ingrained in me from my culture and upbringing that you don't get to rest, and that's something I've been trying to unlearn. And so even though I'm depressed, I still do what I have to do because that's what I've seen every woman do in my culture and in my community and in my family. So I still am not doing well mentally at all. And I still feel exhausted, but I've been pushing myself to try to do like the bare minimum things that I have to do as a mom, as a freelancer, someone who's trying to grow business. And it's been really hard. And previously I talked about grapes, which stands for be gentle for self or gentle with self. The R is relaxation, the A is accomplishment, P is pleasure, E is exercise, and S is social. So you try to like find one thing that resonates with you or is like something you specifically would enjoy that fits within each of those categories. And I really liked that tool, and it was one of the tools that I utilized the most when I was like in treatment. And for those who don't know me and you're just finding me, I took like a ton of different treatments when I was navigating like the mental health care system. I've taken like cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, tons of intensive outpatient and inpatient programs. And grapes is just a tool that I found that I liked a lot, but I kind of molded it and made it to my own, where I do something or a couple things every day that was like good for my mind, for my body, and for my spirit. Lately, though, I have been neglecting those things. And I haven't been keeping up with it as strictly as I was in years prior or like even months prior. And I feel like that's contributing to why I'm still experiencing this very lengthy depressive episode. Um, and I've had like because I also have severe depression. I always have like a low level, I have a baseline depression all the time anyway. But lately, it's been like it's getting back to how bad it was during like my lowest moments. And I have been in like severe depression that was so bad where I literally just felt like I couldn't function at all. Like I just didn't care enough. I was just past the point of caring about anything. Um, and sometimes that those thoughts and that mentality and that feeling, those feelings come back recently. Um, and yesterday I felt called to like do some spiritual practices. And today I feel like I have a clearer head compared to like the previous couple of weeks. I've been like really angry and angsty and frustrated and like just splitting on myself and splitting on other people and splitting on the world. And today I feel a lot more like level headed, like the fog is kind of lifting and I can think straight. Um, and so that's part of the reason why I really wanted to talk about my spiritual practices, because for me, a big part of my recovery has been figuring out what works for me, what resonates for me. And it's something I encourage everybody to do in their own journeys. Figure out what resonates and helps you, and don't just solely rely on one specific method. Specifically, in my opinion, this is all my opinion, relying solely on like the traditional methods like Western medicine. I think combining it with like holistic practices that honor you as a full human person and also like a spirit if you are a spiritual person. So for me, incorporating spiritual practices into my recovery, I think was like the single most transformative thing for me, because I am a deeply spiritual person. And I wanted to find a way to heal that also incorporated methods that resonate with me, and ancestral healing, because that's important to me. And I feel that I carry generational trauma too. Um, but yeah, I wanted something that felt more holistic than just like those very clinical, pathological ways of viewing it. Like at the end of the day, we're people. And so we have to honor that we are humans. We're experiencing deep and intense emotions for a reason. And so I feel like that side of it has been really healing for me. And so I'm not going to share everything that I do, because some of the things that I do are rooted in like a long, 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 long standing of tradition. And unfortunately, I feel like our culture today doesn't necessarily respect other cultures and traditions the way that I wish that we did. I think we like to think we do, but we feel like we just are entitled to everybody's culture and tradition. And I don't say this in a way to make it sound inaccessible um, and uninclusive, because I don't resonate with that. I don't resonate with anything that feels uninclusive. But at the same time, these practices are rooted in traditions stemming years and years and years before our modern time, when inclusivity matters as much as it does today. And there are traditions that I think we need to be respectful of, and I think that sometimes we lack respect when we come in with this entitled attitude. And so I won't be sharing every single thing because it's also something I'm still learning about. Um, but yeah, let's just dive right in. So, one of the first things that I really started to explore, or I guess I should say came across in the very beginning of my mental health recovery, especially during my lowest moments, was I'm trying to figure out like the best way to explain this. Connectivity with nature. Um, I started to study different traditions, different ancient traditions and practices and magics that incorporate connecting with ourselves and connecting ourselves to everything that is. So for me, I always felt called to go to the ocean. I'm scared of open water. I don't go into the ocean to swim at all, but I love to go to the beach. And I remember every Saturday I would go, like during 2020, during like the worst mental health year arguably I've had. I would always go to the beach with my son or just to the beach alone when my son was like with his dad. And I would always bring my journal. I'd always bring my crystals. I'd always bring, like, I grew up Christian. So during that year, I was exploring a lot of different spiritual practices, including those I grew up in. So sometimes I'd bring my Bible and sometimes I wouldn't. Um, and I would always sit in the same spot. I would always like start in the same routine, and it's nothing that I planned out. It's just something that I naturally started to do. Like I just started to go to the same spot, the same beach, and journal and pray and like put my crystals out and read tarot cards or read Bible or something like that. And I realized later I started coming across this content about Ifa and like African spirituality and the Orishas. And I started learning about like the Orisha Yamoja or Yamaya. And she is like a water spirit, water Orisha. And I remember I just kept like finding this content. It wasn't something I was seeking out. It was just something that I felt like I was just finding. And I resonated so much with it. And it was just so interesting to me that I felt like I unknowingly created this sacred spot by the ocean. And I swear every time I went, and I journaled and I prayed and I just spent time with my son, spent time with myself, and I would stay out there all day sometimes. I always felt better the next day. I always felt like I could approach the rest of my week better. And the times that I didn't do that were usually the times when I would have these terrible episodes. And so I started to realize the connection between me having these types of rituals and routines and my mental well being and like how I was feeling and coping with the day. So I started trying to learn more and just exploring that a bit more. And I've been exploring that since on and off. Um, and I started trying to just incorporate different practices into my daily life rather than just like waiting till I got to like one day a week to do it. And it was hard because when I'd have like those emotional low moments, I'd stop caring. I usually got very apathetic. And so I would stop caring enough to want to do these practices. And it's still something I'm clearly working on. Um, but I remember I started to incorporate meditation into my daily practice. Again, it's still something I struggle with when I have like these emotional highs and lows. But it's something that I was trying to be intentional about. And I also started incorporating like mindfulness, which I think meditation, mindfulness go hand in hand. Um, Finding ways to be grounded and present because I disassociate a lot as someone with BPD and severe trauma. Like even now, I disassociate a lot, even when I'm talking on this podcast. And so I was trying to incorporate mindfulness and meditation, and I started to learn about like a lot of esoteric practices. So I started picking up like tarot and oracle card reading and just exploring different books to learn about different spiritual practices. Those that resonated most with me were those of the African traditional practices. So like Ifa, and those from like Yoruba origins because my ancestry um, is from the Yoruba religions or that area because my ancestors are descendants of slaves. Um, and so all of that called to me ancestral healing and just like learning about the ways in which my ancestors work through things because a big part of my experience has been realizing that a lot of things were passed down to me, and this is something that I started to explore primarily from like a scientific perspective. Like I was reading like a lot of research articles about like generational trauma and how trauma can literally be passed down. And I know there was like studies on different groups and different like demographics. um, and I started only recently, unfortunately, um, seeing more people talk about that in regards to like my community. But it was really interesting to me because it's definitely something that I considered throughout my mental health recovery. There had been times where I just felt like I was born into it. And, I would beat myself up and I'd tell myself I'm just having like a victim mentality. And then I started to like find this research and realize no, like trauma can be passed down to you. Um and I'm a woman too. And so like a lot of like the women in my family have had really traumatic experiences, and there are just like some parts of my recovery that I just felt like had to be connected to some of these things. And so I was trying to piece it all together, and and it really sparked my interest in like ancestral healing and like generational trauma and all of that stuff. And so I really just started to deep dive into like ancestral practices and trying to learn and get as much information as I could. A lot of these practices are closed and there's a lot of secrecy around it just because of like the history of, I don't have to give you guys a history lesson. I think you can understand why it is the way that it is, especially with the stigma on any African practices. There's stigma and it's demonized much of the time. So it's hard to get the information, but for some reason, I was able to find these things were like coming to me. And so it's something I started to explore. So it started with the beach, and that was unintentional. And then I started to incorporate meditation into mindfulness, and that was more intentional. And then I started picking up books, and I have been doing that since I came across like more of this content. So I've been looking up authors, podcasters, like reading specific books, and trying to incorporate those that resonate with me and those that I felt comfortable practicing without having like a mentor or spiritual house or any of that. So I started to make like a little altar, which my altar is very sad, and I really hope to um, invest in a nicer altar. And I started to incorporate more like rituals. I've always journaled, but I started to be really intentional and specific in my journaling. And I'd also started to script or just write things out that I had as like requests, things that I would like to see happen in my life, things that I was feeling, and just kind of writing petitions. Wow, I really can't talk right now. But just writing petitions to kind of call my energy back to me. So just things like that. I started doing a lot more of that, and I still do a lot of that. Um, and I'd say probably in the past year or so, I've been really intentional about protecting my energy and my space, and that's something I still I that's probably the biggest thing I notice. Like when I'm not feeling well, if I haven't cleansed myself or my space, once I do, I immediately feel better. Um, and so those are things that now are like a deal breaker for me. I have to incorporate mindfulness meditation. I have to connect with nature. I like to go out into nature and connect with spirit in those places, in those spaces, because that's what my ancestors did. And that helps me a lot. Connecting with my ancestors also helps me a lot. Um, I I like to write out what I'm feeling and like put requests to the universe for things that I feel like I need or I'm lacking or where support is needed in my life. And I like to do cleansing. So, what I do for cleansing is I do a lot of smudging. For those who don't know what that is, it's like sage, like smoke cleansing. I do that in my space a lot, and I also smudge myself sometimes. I take a lot of salt baths. I'm a big spiritual bath girly. And I can share maybe a recipe or something that I use, but I really love taking baths, being in water, being near water, taking showers. This is something that, for as long as I can remember, I've done to help myself feel better without even realizing that it was something that I now consider, anyway, to be very spiritual in nature. And yeah, it's spiritual in nature. And it is, I like to think that whether we know it or not, we all kind of, those who lean to be more spiritual anyway, tend to do things that are very ancestral without realizing it. Like, we do things that maybe those in our family or in our lineage did in the past to heal, and maybe we don't even realize that's what we're doing. um and that's what I like to think. So I was called to a certain Orisha of the water, and it's interesting because I have always taken a shower or a bath since as far back as I can remember. Because of trauma, sometimes things are blurry and I don't remember everything sometimes, and sometimes I remember things really vividly. But one really vivid memory I have from my childhood, during a very traumatic time in my childhood, was I was taking a bath, and I think this is like the beginning of when I started to really disassociate. I was taking a bath and I was like writing credits in the soap bubbles and thinking in my head, this is a movie. This is my movie, and this is a chapter in that movie. Which makes I don't know if that really even makes sense, but I was a kid. And I remember thinking that, and I remember feeling so calm and safe, like amid like all the chaos and confusion of what was happening at that time in my life. And I, throughout every age of my life where things have been really difficult for me, I always went to take a shower, and I would just stay in the shower. I remember I would get in so much trouble because I would be in the shower for like 30 minutes. Sometimes I'd be in the shower for like an hour. I would stay in a bath for until like my entire skin was just wrinkly. Like, I just feel so safe in the water. And so being really intentional in my baths is something that I incorporate when I'm really feeling low, and it helps me a lot. So I use a lot of like Epsom salt. I put a lot of crystals and different color candles depending on the type of energy work I want to do. And I smudge it, I set intentions. Sometimes I add things like flowers or citrus. Um Candles. I like to have all like the elements around when I can, like rocks that I picked up from the beach. Like, I just make it a whole thing. And I think that even if you're not a spiritual person, that can be a really special thing to do for yourself. And I talked in a previous episode about like some of the self-care practices I do, but I think that the baths are things that cross over for me between self-care and spiritual practices, which for me go hand in hand. So those are probably like the top things that I do. And I noticed that when I fall off from any of those things, like if I go a week without doing any of those things, I will fall into a deep depression. And that's just something I have had to like come to terms with and realize that we all have different things that we need to feel okay. We all have different routines, and we all have um, different methods that we use for healing and recovery. And I think that once you do find something that helps, try to be consistent and stick with it as much as you can. And that's just something that I am still struggling with. It's not easy to do, but I notice that when I'm consistent, like I feel so much better. And these practices go hand in hand with like my self-care practices where, I'm trying to eat very clean and healthy. I'm moving my body, I'm getting sunlight, I am trying to be social and spend time in community and with friends and loved ones. I'm like being active in my hobbies, and I haven't been doing that for the past couple of weeks. I have not really left my house to go be social. I haven't It's not that I haven't had the um like, it's not that I don't want to. I just feel exhausted by the thought of it. And if you struggle with depression, then you probably resonate and you understand what I'm saying. Even if I want to talk to people and be social, it was just like the thought of getting dressed and, driving somewhere and just talking to people, like, yeah, it just felt like I didn't have the energy to do it. So I'm lacking a lot of motivation lately, and I've just been feeling like just doing the basic day-to-day things have felt so much harder. And so I'm trying to reincorporate these routines, right? Usually what I do is I will like try to force myself to incorporate the self-care routines first and then like reincorporate all of my spiritual routines. But now I'm realizing that when I actually, for me, and this is just for me, when I prioritize my spiritual routines first, I feel like I feel better faster, at least mentally. And so then I have more motivation to incorporate those self-care practices like doing my hair, skincare, eating well, movement, socializing. And so I'm really just trying to get back on track with those practices because nothing shifts my mindset more than these types of practices, and that's just what works for me. I think it's the same as like my friends and the people that I know who are religious, and like if they don't go to church, then they don't feel like they can move forward with, you know, the rest of their week. Like everything feels off. It's like that with me and my spiritual practices now. And I don't think I really took it as seriously as I should have. And so now I'm realizing how important it is to be consistent in the things that we know help us. And I know that like when we get depressed and when we go through these episodes, our mindsets can be really self-sabotaging and it can be really hard. And that's when really pushing through and practicing opposite action is so important. And I'm not at all minimizing how difficult that is because it's really hard. I'm struggling with it right now myself. Like I genuinely don't even want to be recording right now. I'm so tired. But I already feel better because I'm doing the things that I know make me feel good. And so I just encourage you to find your own routines, your own practices. If you're not spiritual, that's fine. If you're not religious at all, that's fine. Just finding something that makes you feel alive, right? Like we all have something. If you don't have something, then this is like an opportunity to explore that, right? I always say if you feel like you have nothing that makes you feel alive, for one, that's probably just really severe depression, right? That's not you. I do think that we all have things that make us feel good. It's just that when we're so severely depressed, we literally like we're not getting that dopamine, like we don't feel it, right? And so doing things that can help like at least from like more of like a physiological perspective, doing things that can help like reduce cortisol and give you more dopamine can help. Because I always say we have to try to do what we can to lift that depression, you know, in whatever ways we have control over, because sometimes we just don't. Sometimes some of us have to just let that flow through. Like sometimes when I'm really depressed, I just have to cry and give myself space to let those emotions flow through, and you know, the depression itself can last, but then I can like release emotions to the point to where now I'm able to at least do something and, you know, get on with my day, and that can be really hard. And so but once you are at that point where you feel like you've kind of done like the basics and you're starting to feel a little bit more stable and you feel like maybe you can do something, then that's an opportunity for you to go explore and try new things, because then you can figure out what things do make you feel most alive and what can you start incorporating and what routines and like practices can you build to help you maintain that sense of stability. And then the challenge from there would just be staying consistent with it, especially through like the highs and lows. And that's a challenge. And so I think the one thing that I need to work on right now is allowing people to support me when I'm really struggling, because I split a lot. So recently I've just had this like mentality of like people just disappoint me. I know it's not true, but my mind just convinces me that I'm not going to have people that are really there for me and understand me. And I just know that's not true because I've had so many amazing people be introduced to my life, even in the past year. But I'm just so frustrated. I'm just so frustrated. And so that's when I remind myself that good people exist. I have evidence of this. I know some, I know some amazing people. People do want to understand me and be there for me and support me. And I have to kind of like argue with my own mind, and it's exhausting. But it's important to do that. It's important to continue to challenge these thoughts, so that you can have the motivation to move forward. Otherwise, it can be so debilitating. And so these spiritual practices are just practices. Cannot talk today. These are just some of the ways that help me have like the energy and the power to fight these thoughts that come up. And whenever I do them, I notice these thoughts are just like gone now. So yeah, that's what works for me. I hope and encourage you to find what works for you. And also, I do want to just say, when I'm not feeling well and I'm unstable and I'm dysregulated, that these podcast episodes can be really hard for me to record, and they can sound really rushed and kind of I sound discombobulated, and I have trouble articulating myself, and I have a lot of executive dysfunctioning issues too, because I am neurodivergent. So I sometimes, like right now, my mind just goes blank, and I can't, like, I have trouble finishing my sentences. My words come out jumbled. So I apologize for that. I'm sure that's not pleasant to listen to. And so I genuinely appreciate you if you are still listening to this podcast and you've listened to this episode up until now. It's not easy for me to record when I'm not feeling well mentally, but I think it's important to show up in my authenticity. And this is a mental health podcast. And the reason why I created it was to be vulnerable and to show other people struggling, especially people who look like me, that you're not alone. Like, there are other people out there who struggle. There are other people out there who have executive dysfunctioning, and we can't get our words out when we're really, really overwhelmed and stressed and depressed. And we're still pushing through. And that's something I want those who are struggling to be reminded of, because right now I can't even talk, but I'm doing my best. So thank you. Thank you for listening to, watching this podcast, and I I hope it helps. If it doesn't, I'm so sorry. I hope to have more episodes that allow me to really just sit and focus in depth on topics with more resources. I don't want it all to sound like a ramble, but right now I'm just like in that season where I'm just pushing through, and I'm in a really deep depression, and it's hard for me to do anything, but I still want to show up in the best way that I can. So this is me showing up. And yeah, so I'll leave you with that. Um, I, as usual, encourage you to connect with me on social media. I include all the links to that in my show notes. And I just opened an Etsy shop too. So I'm going to be creating new drops and designs that are very geared toward those in the mental health community, in the neurodivergent community, queer community, all my communities. And so I encourage you to check that out too. I have the links in the show notes. And until next time, bye.